next speaker is Rachel Barnard. So a few months ago, Joe Lilovich and I were down in Hobart, and we were attending a conference that was run by one of our upcoming speakers, Andrew Griffiths, for a couple of days. It was an extraordinary couple of days. And in that conference, I met another extraordinary human being, a gentleman by the name of Paul Fairweather, who I hope to have on this stage next year. That's a side note. Paul's running a conference tomorrow in Brisbane. And in the context of that, he said to me, I'm bringing this cool woman from New York over to Australia, and I really think she needs to be on your stage. And I was like, cool, woman, New York, Australia, let's go. And what I learned was that Rachel is actually from Vegas, so that made you even cooler. And she's living in New York, and she's been doing this incredible project with young people in the youth justice system over there. She's actually an architect in terms of her background. Can you just see the layers of Clarissa's brain going like all the favourite things in one sentence? Architect, creative, Australian, living in New York, helping the world. Like, we need you on our stage. So that's my introduction. Can you please welcome Rachel? I'm really looking forward to this. And that is a great jacket.
I wore the jacket on purpose because you're such a sparkly, wonderful room. And what is sparkly and smart are two of my very favourite things in the whole world, combining those things. It's a very rare combination. I think if we see a group of people that you'd never see you guys in New York, you'd all be wearing black. That's what I've got underneath. But we think that being smart is being serious, but actually expanding our possibilities and becoming limitless, I think, does involve sparkle. And it just involves shifting what is normal and shifting our perspective, but also shifting the spaces that we occupy. So I'm very happy to be here. I also loved what Mel said at the beginning of the day about confidence and having a community where you can confess one of your secret desires is also as rare as sparkle and colour and smart. So thank you so much for having me. Let's begin. Haha. So combining sparkle and smarts has led to some really odd things in the press for me. So I wanted to prove that I really am into sparkle, and I just didn't get out the sparkly jacket. This is an article in the New York Times when we were the first arts-based alternative to incarceration in New York. At the time, we were in the era of mass incarceration, and by the time I stepped down as the founder, we had kept 1,400 young people out of jail in the adult criminal legal system, all avoiding an adult criminal record that would last for the rest of their life. But as we were getting this New York Times coverage, I ushered this journalist around for a couple of days through the criminal legal system, and I gave a very good, professional, smart interview, but this is the quote he pulled as I was talking to another lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, a lawyer, in the courtroom, which is Rachel Barnard, an Australian architect who founded Young New Yorkers, says she is trying to pour beauty in the criminal justice system. And that while that is true, I think it does scream in the normal world new agey, but it was the secret sauce to our success. This is a project that I'm not going to talk about at length today, but I was very fortunate to be given the opportunity to be the artist in residence at the Department of Probation. So New York City is one of those special places where the city offers artist in residencies. You get paid to be stationed inside a government agency and create an art project. And this was made out of 3,000 pinwheels that we made by hand. It was called the Wisdom Pavilion, and I mapped probation officers and clients' wisdom and created an atlas of the wisdom. And there was a documentary made about it, and this is my quote in the documentary. I believe that sparkle is very underused in social justice. So when I say I'm really into the confetti and your brand and the joy and the fun and expanding your possibilities, I really do. I'm aligned. Thank you, Clarissa. One way you can look at our work at Young New Yorkers and working to end mass incarceration is through the lens of transformative justice. And it's really interesting to ask yourself the question, what does... I'm really conscious that I'm not looking at you guys, but I feel like I should be standing over there. Ask yourself, what does transformative justice mean to you? How would you define that to someone if you were ChatGPT? Is it that we're transforming the lives and the behaviours of young people who have been caught up in the criminal legal system? Are we transforming the professional lives of people that are criminal legal actors inside the criminal legal system? Or are we transforming the system itself? And at Young New Yorkers, we really worked on using art and connection to shift cultures and at moments of discretion, of sentencing, and even at the point of an arrest, to transform the system itself. That's because when we began a bit over a decade ago, we were at 30 years of the era of mass incarceration. And I know it's not cool to have notes, but on this part, I have to get the facts right. So I have a little crunched up piece of paper. So we'd had 30 years of tough on crime political rhetoric, which led to some really devastating policies and legislation. This really impacted young people across the nation, especially in New York City. Up until that point, when someone had gotten in trouble or a young person had gotten in trouble, we met them with humane and restorative sentences, but also just understanding that they were young, they were growing, they were learning and developing. But this era of mass incarceration saw criminal involvement escalate for very minor infractions. So in New York City, I had people who had been 16 and 17-year-olds who had been handcuffed and arrested for jumping a turnstile or from moving from one carriage on the train to the other. And many of them incurred a lifelong criminal record, which would impact their ability to get work. Because it's theft of services, that's jumping the turnstile, reads to an employer very differently than I was 16 and I jumped the turnstile because I didn't have money. Often these kids are living very close to the poverty line, if not underneath the poverty line. And then the other thing to remember is that in every single country, arrest rates drop after the age of 25 because the brain scientists know, but we've known for centuries really, that our consequential thinking kicks in properly at 25. Sometimes, and we all know this from our own experience of the young men in our lives, especially about, like, what were you thinking? And they're like, I wasn't. And that's the honest truth. They weren't thinking. They don't think ahead. They don't think of the consequences. And so to saddle young people with a lifelong criminal record that narrowed and narrowed and narrowed their opportunities was particularly cruel. Like all oppressions, it falls squarely along racial lines. And this is why I have the paper. In 2015, when we were a few years into running Young New Yorkers and building Young New Yorkers, 33% of 16 and 17-year-olds in New York were Black or Latinx. Yet they were the 72% of the people being arrested. So 33 to 72%. What is really devastating and astounding is that 95% of those people that were arrested, that were incarcerated, were Black or Latinx. And it's obvious that we don't put our own children into adult jails. And there's some terrible, violent break in our imagination about how we look at 16 and 17-year-olds who are poor, Black or brown. Oh, I have one more really good point. But it's very easy in the dialogue or in the discourse to be angry at the lawyers and the judges, the prosecutors, the social workers, the culture. But when you have hundreds of kids coming through your courtroom every day, it doesn't just seem like a social justice impossibility to bring equity back and justice back into the system. Back is arguably, it's never been there. But It's an administrative impossibility, and Judge Grasso, one of the judges that I partnered with early on, calls it the churn openly. The young people come in, they're called, they stand next to their defense lawyer, they do not speak. The only representation that they have of themselves is their rap sheet and possibly a very grim social workers report. That's it. And they're usually scared, so they're defensive or meek looking. They don't know what's going on. They hop out into the corridor and their defense attorney starts to explain to them what the plea deal was brokered for them, what the consequences are going to be. Are they going to have a criminal record? Are they going to go to jail? Are they going to do community service? So really in this context, to go back to the transformative justice, many people, many grants, many funders would ask me about recidivism and behavioural change, but we cannot put the burden of such an oppressive system on the shoulders of 16 and 17-year-olds and expect them through their individual behaviours to end mass incarceration. Our work needs to be measured by the transformation of the system itself. The other really fucked up thing in 2011 and 2012 was we were in the middle of stop and frisk, and hundreds of kids were being stopped in poor black and brown neighbourhoods every day and frisked. And if you got annoyed by being frisked for the third time that week, you could be arrested for, ironically, resisting arrest, even though it was not, you weren't being approached for arrest, you were being approached for a stop and frisk that Mayor Bloomberg put in place. This was later ended by the Supreme Court, who ruled it a violation of human rights, which it absolutely is. But the thing to remember is, while stop and frisk was going on, and we all remember what it's like to be a teenager, or if you have teenagers, you know when there's an injustice, how deeply they feel it and how they respond. That's why we send teenagers and young people to wars and things like that, because we've known for centuries that culturally we can use that age group to do incredible things or horrific things. And so if you've been stopped for third time, possibly by the same police officer, you're probably going to lose your temper, and then you have an arrest record, possibly a criminal record. If you scuffle, that's assaulting a police officer, you're kind of screwed. Sorry for the swearing. I swear. Great. Who said that? I fucking love you too. But, you know, this is Malik said in the first program that we had, that they came up to my uncle and me and said, "Are you boys going to make this easy or hard for us?" So you can imagine seeing your uncle, who you respect, being referred to as a boy and having to submit to a random police search, what that does to your internal psyche. The other thing about this problem is, you know, I'm emphasising that this is a systems problem, this isn't a young person's problem, this isn't an individual's problem, but all of this messaging does fold into your internal life, and what you see possible or how you perceive yourself as a young person is violently psychically impacted. So at the beginning, in the first day of every long form program that we would have, say an 8-week program, we would do this language exercise where we would say, what words are used to describe us in our everyday life? And you can see we have brother, good father, caring, spontaneous, bilingual, young OG, old heart, words that you can imagine are normal and familial and things that would be exchanged between friends in your community. But then what words had you actually heard being said about you once you were involved in the criminal legal system, and you've got the most horrific words, and the words that sometimes come out of police officers' mouths at a point of an arrest, or as you're going through the guards to get into the courtroom, or by other people in the corridors of the courtroom, are appalling. Everything from, you know, just that kid, meaning you're one of those kids, you're a bad kid, is just absolutely devastating. And then, you know, we would tear up that criminal justice, criminal legal system language that we'd heard about ourselves, and we would rewrite who we were going to be inside of Young New Yorkers. And so these are the words that this group came up with, which included advocate, creative, resilient, connected, greatness, determined. And this is a really good trick to do self-described language like this, because you tear up the other two things, and then every week you have that on the board front and center. And if somebody is not being great or hardworking or a visionary in that moment, you can just gently remind them who they are and to honor their word about who they are. So I recommend that if you're ever it's really fun. Okay, so now we're going to shift and just talk about the actual founding story. That's a terrible photograph now that it's bigger on the screen. About the founding of Young New Yorkers. How did an architect become the founder of the first arts-based alternative to incarceration in New York? So my first few years in New York City, I worked as an architect. I worked on mostly community buildings, but I did also design 2 very fancy penthouses, one in Soho and one in Tribeca. But in my spare time, I kind of ran around the city with my friends doing public art projects. I did a months-long project where I just wore a head cam and smiled at people and tracked how people responded in different neighborhoods. And we also did a project called Intersection where we filmed multiple intersections and seamed them together and then installed this video of a collage of different New York City neighborhoods in the city. You can kind of see a small installation in the background there. But after the recession, I decided to go and study advanced master's in architectural design at Columbia. And I went there for this special year with the purpose of really exiting architecture and doing not architecture, doing something more experimental. I had a list of all the people that I admired who had studied architecture but were doing something different. And so I didn't know what the different thing was, but that was my intention. I had the most fantastic year, one of the happiest years of my life, just working in a big room with hundreds of people all through the night and following their ideas and building different things together. It was so much fun. I loved it. If I was rich, I would study forever. But at the end, I applied for a fellowship called the Goodman Fellowship. It's for an architectural project of social significance. It's $20,000. It's usually split up between different applicants. But I applied for the whole 20 grand for a project called Young New Yorkers. It was a public art project to give 16 and 17-year-olds a platform around legislation that impacted them the most, that they were defined as adults by the law, that they were arrested as adults, prosecuted as adults, and sentenced as adults, to give them a platform to say whatever they wanted about raising the age of criminal responsibility. And then came the nothing times. Once I'd won the money for that award, what I ended up doing was meeting groups of people every 3 weeks and brainstorming how the public art project could go. And meeting everybody I could. I was working also as a project manager for a fancy art restorer, but meeting everyone I could about what it was to work with young people, what it was to work on criminal legal reform. So it was a really rich and fertile time, but many people on the team at that point or inside our community after a year had left and given up on the project because they hadn't seen anything. But I don't think Young New Yorkers would have been what it was without the nothing time. So whoever it is that's spending 2 years deciding on what their name is, I feel you. They're practice names because that happened to us. But the wonderful thing about nothing times is that from nothing, you really can create anything. And this is one of the second cohorts that are really wonderful to work with. But how did we get to a yes? How did we go from being nothing to something? Because when we did emerge, the criminal legal system really had the experience of who are these people out of nowhere getting all of this success? But we'd had more than a year chugging along and achieving literally nothing. And the first person that gave us a yes was Lisa Schreibersdorf, the executive director of Brooklyn Defenders Services, the biggest public defenders in Brooklyn. And she literally said to me at the end of the meeting, "Sure, I'll say yes to this so you can go finger paint with the kids or whatever." And I said, "I both love you and hate you right now." And then that developed into the most amazing decade-long partnership where I could turn to her with issues, and in the end she would also turn to me with issues inside our respective organisations. But I want to say that's the gift of Sparkle. Like, it's to be underestimated when it happens. Use it as a weapon, because boy, did we blow her mind. And then there's a few public defenders in this shot, as well as artists and designers. We were a very multidisciplinary team that came up with this and pushed this further. But one, Sydney, she kept saying, this needs to not be a public art project, it needs to be court mandated, this needs to be a sentence. And so Chief Judge Littman had just announced a year into our project that he was going to raise the age of criminal responsibility to 18. And this meant politically, inside adult criminal courts, they were all scrambling to find a different way of prosecuting and sentencing 16 and 17-year-olds. So a couple of the defence attorneys literally snuck me into court because they were friends with the security guards as the judge was setting up his bench. Judge Gabay, who you can see the back of his head here at our first exhibition. And I pitched him the project. I told him I had funding from Columbia University. I didn't mention it was from the architecture school. And he said, yes, on the spot, introduced me to all the administrators. And they said, great, next year we'll run your program. But my visa was about to run out because I only had a year after leaving school to stay in the country. And I said, no, we need to begin it in 6 weeks, and then we need it to be 8 weeks, and then I need to leave the country the next day. And so the courts are a bureaucracy, so to say how bought in everyone was to actually make that happen was an incredible moment in history. And so here, Judge Gabay came to almost every exhibition that we had and became a huge advocate for us after saying yes and betting on us. So this is the inaugural 8-week program in 2012. They all had their cases dismissed and sealed. Many of them were going to default to being incarcerated on Rikers if they didn't fulfill it, and everyone graduated, everyone attended every session. And when I walked into the first class after having interviewed and spent time with each of them, I realised that I'd kind of found my life work. It was a really moving, falling in love kind of feeling, like the air shifted. I remember hiding behind a column where they couldn't see me and going, oh my God, like I was so excited. And so I couldn't believe it. And so I know we're talking about being limitless, and I just say that to say sometimes our intellectual perception of what we were made to do, which for me was definitely being a capital A famous architect and public artist and going around the world and being fancy and like written up in journals, is not the reality of what you're meant to do. Sometimes the reality is the energy and the space between you and people, and you discover it by action. So play, which is very aligned with confetti and sparkle, and the conference here is so important for becoming all that you're meant to become. These are some very blurry shots that I wanted to delete, but I didn't want to send Lauren another slideshow, so I didn't. But this is just some scenes from the first program. But we were still a public art project. So the arc of the curriculum was so rigorous. There was 2 artists, me and a social worker, that we would meet Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and design rigorously the program and then deliver it. But the last 2 sessions were dedicated to public art because we were still a public art project. And here you can see Derek and his colleagues all taking turns to speak at their exhibition. But the most amazing thing is that they each had come up with ideas for public art projects. Isaiah, who had been arrested for more than 100 counts of graffiti and was facing a year in jail for that. Wanted to turn all the blank billboards into a graffiti project that young people caught for graffiti could be sentenced to, which I don't think would have gone ahead. Victor wanted to, really cared about gang violence in his neighbourhoods and what he saw as the needless fights that happened. So he wanted to turn Times Square into a giant video game that every month the gangs could get together and beat each other in video games and be celebrated for it rather than on the streets. And I think that could have been really cool. But Sachin said that we often forget to have dreams in the neighbourhood. We forget that so much is possible, and he's remembered dreams inside the program and speaking with his colleagues. And his idea was to, every New Year's Day, to have thousands of people walk to Brooklyn Bridge, write their dreams on a paper aeroplane, and we'd talked about collective memory and the spectacle inside of public art. And at the count of 3, all throw their dreams into the air every year, so that it was this collective memory that you could remind each other throughout the year of what your dreams are and that you had them. And at the last moment, mainly because it's easy to make paper aeroplanes as opposed to turn Times Square into a giant video game, I bought his public art project into the final exhibition, and I watched him go up to every prosecutor, every probation officer, the judges that were there, the prosecutor that had prosecuted his case, his defense attorney, his social worker, and he got all of these adults to write down their dreams on a paper aeroplane, and then at the end he counted to 3, and they all threw off the aeroplanes into the sky. And when I saw parents and prosecutors and judges and probation officers laughing and connecting, I realized that we were onto something, and the one-off project, public art project, had become a not-for-profit organisation. And so the following 6 months was sorting out my immigration and starting a not-for-profit. So as a not-for-profit, as a public art project, we began working from the thesis that the US can end mass incarceration with a discretionary power that already exists at each point of contact a young person may have with the criminal legal system. At the point of arrest, there are people that are arrested, there are people that are not arrested, there are people that are brought in, there are people that are handcuffed, and their heads are banged against the top of the car. At the point inside the precinct, you can get a DAT, or you can send a 16-year-old for 36 hours in a group cell, waiting for their arraignment underneath the courtroom, which is disgusting. The air smells like urine. It's unsafe. And you can, at the point of sentencing, you can choose to dismiss and seal a case. Oh, we've only got 15 minutes left. Okay. So this is a one-day project. I've got a lot of slides left. I was really worried I wouldn't have enough time, and we're not even halfway through. This is a one-day project with me and Judge Grasso partnered on the year following the exhibition. That's the kind of thing that started to become possible. And what happened is these young people who were arrested received desk appearance tickets. They weren't held for arraignments, and that triggered a new court part where they could come into court to be heard for their DAT, then go across the room to the next courtroom where I was, and we would hold a big 3-hour program, and then that afternoon they could have their artworks presented and have their case dismissed and sealed. Normally when you have a DAT, you are trapped inside the system, coming back to court date after court date for a year. You're missing school, all of these sorts of things. And Judge Grasso, a former NYPD officer, the perfect person to create change because he's perceived as being conservative, created this really fast track to exit the system. The other thing is we hung up their aspirational self-portraits. So all of a sudden, they could represent themselves inside of court. And if you want to know a great way to influence discretionary sentencing, I think Benjamin is a perfect story because after he got arrested for turnstile jumping, he then got arrested for pissing outside the chicken shop. And Judge Grasso and his court attorney really took this as a personal betrayal because they had put so much effort into taking this up, and they said that his artwork couldn't be allowed in the courtroom. And Benjamin, 10 feet tall, super athletic, strong, 16-year-old, looked like Michael Jordan, but he was 16 years old, had cut out 10 black horses and put himself in the middle of it, and underneath he'd written family, love, loyalty. And so I just left that on Judge Grasso's court attorney's desk, and the next thing you know, she's coming in, she's weeping, and he had his case dismissed. Not sealed, but dismissed. And that's discretionary, that's working to shift discretionary cultures. So here are some of the aspirational collages that kids were able to take to court. I think I have time to, this is a project we did around gun violence in Brownsville early on, but I don't think I have time to write about it. But that's the head of probation in Queens, Karen. That's Judge Grasso who came, and he brought over Inspector Gallotta, who was the head of the Brownsville precinct at the time. This is the neighborhood with the highest rate of gun violence in New York City, because they had refused to come on my invitation, but the kids really thought to end gun violence, they needed to create peace, and trust between police and kids. So they'd created the word trust out of white roses, which they said surrender is like this courageous act for peace sometimes. And then the police officers in the community wrote down their dreams for Brownsville, their love letters for Brownsville, and in exchange they got a rose. And then, many years later in the program, as we were showing past projects, this group who really cared about police brutality took this idea and next leveled it in their project. That's not meant to be love letters to Brownsville, that's meant to say unity. And so they created this garden party with all their images and hopes and wishes for the future of policing, and had people write down their vision for what policing could look like. And then, because it was all about unity, like the kids wanted to dissolve the difference between people and people, police officers and people who had been arrested, but they also wanted to bring in diversity. So through this writing exercise, it was not just their vision that they tied to the wall, but they wore a badge that they stood for unity, a police badge that they stood for unity, but what else they were contributing through diversity to the community. So in this case, positivity and open-minded. And this is the head prosecutor for the youth part being handed a rose. This is the police officers having genuine dialogue. Judge Gabay again, our first yes. And there is the police holster with a rose in it. And this incredible group of young people that did such a good job. I'm going to just go through this one. This is an early exhibition in the district court. But this is when, this is a prosecutor. This is when they started to catch on that it wasn't just a kids' problem, that they themselves needed to change. So Young New Yorkers not only changes the lives of young people, but they also give a fresh perspective to those prosecuting cases involving these young people. And they started to realize that their culture and their perception needed to change. This is Wisdom Gift Exchange, which was held in the Eastern District Court in Brooklyn. We weren't allowed to put anything up on the walls, so we suspended a gift box using like 300 helium balloons, and my hands were almost severed by the end of that by tying balloons. And you can also see that the self-representation, so the representation of who they were beyond their rap sheets, is always present in a Young New Yorkers exhibition. You can see their self-portraits on the way in. But what this group of young women were really interested in is who gets to learn from their mistakes, who gets punished and traumatized for them. And so they invited everybody, all the prosecutors, the judges, and the general public to come in and to write on a disc a terrible mistake they'd made, or how they'd hurt someone, what they learned from it, and the wisdom they had given other people, the wisdom that they could offer other people as a consequence. And so people did that. Their mistakes were then read by a young person sitting at the judge's bench, wrapped in mylar, and certified as wise. And then they got to gift wrap their wisdom and anonymously put it on a tray, and everyone took somebody else's wisdom home at the end. And this is when artifacts became really important. Like if you take an artifact from this experience and it's in your house, you'll remember more the experience of connection, hopefully wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, oh my God, what are we doing? This is Get Your Thrive On, where they turned the courtroom into basically a fun fair, a carnival, but it was all around Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it just made visible what some people don't have enough food and water every day, and they don't have safety, and yet they're expected to show up inside the criminal legal system in ways that really only someone at the top of the Maslow hierarchies of needs. I won't go into this one because we've only got 10 minutes, but that's the head of the Eastern District Court, the head judge, I forget what that title is, throwing a beanbag in to see if she's got enough to eat that day and if she can progress to the next part of the game. So it's really wonderful. And there's another judge tying his vision once he was self-actualized. And once you got to be self-actualized, you wrote a vision for the world around you. To be self-actualized is to contribute to the world. So what you secretly want to do is secretly what the world needs from you. And this is from Amber, who says, they made me see I'm not a criminal. I'm a young woman who is still making mistakes, learning and growing. And that she had to have that realization and that she could articulate it in her speech is devastating, because it shows how all of those words are internalized. I'm a bad kid, I'm that kid. This is the one I'll talk about, and then we'll skip over the other ones. But this is Courtroom Spectacular. And everyone had to come in and declare what kind of brain they had. Did they have an adolescent brain, an adult brain, or a senior brain? And when you have a senior brain and over 70, you are on the cognitive decline. So like the senior judges having to go around with senior brain hanging from their neck was a bit confronting, but just making it visible to learn what an adolescent brain is and that we don't think ahead, but like literally hanging it around our necks and like making these hidden things visible. And you had to fill out a quiz. Again, one of the head judges not knowing the whole thing about the quiz, but how old are you when part of your brain governs, you can think ahead when you're 25, but you're held account as an adult at 16. And if you get a criminal record, it lasts for life. And what are the collateral consequences? So really declaring the brain science, but also really bringing about the way the criminal justice system interacts with the brain science. If you did well, you got stars. And at Young New York is another thing, like self-representation, like the immersive, dazzling experience. Only at our exhibitions, it's only the kids that speak from the judges' benches, and that's Judge Calabrese, a very big supporter of Young New Yorkers, standing below his bench, just looking really proud. And Daniel is from our very first program. He came on board as staff and just really meeting the kids that he'd seen at some of their worst moments at their best. But the wonderful thing about this group, I'm going to skip over that, is that half of them wanted to be tattoo artists, like half, genuinely. And they all had art and a lot of tattoos. And so I happen to know, because we run the silent art auction where graffiti artists give artwork because many of them have been arrested and want to support us. I happen to know one of the most famous underground tattoo artists in New York City, so we went to his show and they then thought I was the coolest person ever, and Amber even asked me if I could get her concert tickets to some band I'd never heard of, and I was like, I'm not that connected. And so there was this step where you wrote down your aspirations for yourself and the world around you, and then you went to the tattoo parlor behind the bench, and the tattoo artists with eyeliner wrote their interpretation, what they see in you based on what you want to bring to the world. So this is humanity. but we had all sorts of them. That bottom right is Chino, one of the most famous graffiti artists. Fulton Mall in Brooklyn used to be known as Chino's Place. His tags are everywhere. He now uses stickers everywhere. He's so amazing, tattooing the director of Brooklyn Justice Initiatives. And just like a wonderful friendships, unexpected friendships. This is one of my favorites, Brainy. And then, of course, these dreams were attached to, what are those flowers called? Hydrangeas, because kids wanted that because they look like brains. So it's all about neuroscience. And so this is Judge Gabay and Judge Calabrese, the two of the three most long-standing judges that used us as a sentencing option, receiving hydrangeas as they left. And again, like an act of generosity and host. We did many exhibitions, which I can't go into, but they were all amazing and looked at different aspects. If you remember at the beginning, a young person was silent inside the courtroom. I was so grateful that by the end of my 10 years, the DA election for the district attorney in Manhattan, the election was up, and we invited the DA candidates, if this was during COVID, to join us for a moderated conversation led by the young people. So instead of being silent and powerless, they had one of the most well-attended DA forums and debates during that COVID time. This is me and Kamani. Kamani has stayed with us that whole 10 years. He was from the Brownsville project, co-hosting. And then this is Anastasia, who is an eco-warrior and really passionate about the connection between food, the environment, and economic justice. She was homeless and hadn't eaten for 2 days, but she really wanted to eat whole foods and healthy foods. And so she'd gone into Whole Foods and stolen a backpack of groceries and been held in underneath the courtroom and had started vomiting from not having eaten for 2 days. And here she is asking two of the DA candidates, you call it crimes of poverty, but what are you really going to do about it? Do you think I should have been handcuffed? Do you think I should have been forced to eat processed cheese and bread, because you just have white bread and cheese that have been frozen and they're usually still half frozen when you get them. That's all you can eat in the arraignment. And this is them trying to answer that question. And it's like those people that are most impacted by the criminal justice system interviewing the candidates for the DA. And then after 10 years, I stepped down and I had to say goodbye. Can I take 2 more minutes? Yes. Okay. Like many of you, I had the most amazing 10 years. Every day I laughed with the kids. I had the most incredible community, connecting with judges, connecting with kids' parents. I just was living my best life. I knew I was doing what I was meant to do. The space between me and people was challenging and beautiful and honest and true. It was also the most miserable years of my life. During this 10 years, I got Bell's palsy and I also got shingles, 2 things triggered by stress. I didn't start Happy Lawyer, Happy Life. I exited. I didn't give myself the runway to turn it around. I'm not an operator, and also it was time for a new leader who represented the communities that we served. And so after, when I realized this, I actually sat down on the floor of my apartment and bawled for like half a day. But when I wrote to the judges about this, they wrote back the most amazing acknowledgement. I didn't ask them permission to show this email, so I just took their names out. But I think I speak on behalf of Judge and Judge when I say you have inspired us to be better judges and that we will forever be grateful. And then I wrote back to him and said, I just forwarded that to my mum and she cried. My mum is here over in the corner because we're back from Brisbane. And so he wrote back a special email to mum. Your daughter, Rachel, showed us and many other judges and lawyers that when given the right opportunity and support, many young people, often not given a real chance in life, can change their lives and do amazing things for their community. Not only has she made a difference in each person who participated in her program, but changed the mindset forever of many judges and many lawyers, thereby giving opportunities to young people for years to come. Thank you.
Are you actually finished?
Yes.
All right, that actually needs a standing ovation, so can we say thank you?
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much.
I wasn't sure whether she was finished. I was too busy crying, and then I was like, "Oh God, she's finished." That was a thing. Can I steal your buzzer, Rachel? There's so much in that I'm not even going to try and summarise. But she might hang around a little bit at lunch, and you can grab her. Everything, limitless, limitless, limitless. Yeah, like what happens when you just allow yourself to just go? The world can change. I've said this before on this stage, like everyone in this room is changing the world in their little pocket and circle, and I think that's so powerful. It's like in November we come together and you get some energy again, and then you head back off and you start changing your world in your little pocket, and then you get exhausted by August and you stop changing the world. And then you come back in November, you're like, okay, I can do this. This is a thing. I've got the energy. But I think, as you said at the end there, Rachel, one of the challenges when you're giving in such a huge way from your soul, it's exhausting. So you find that. You've got to know when to say yes, and you've also got to know when to go, no, I can't give, but I can give in a different way. I can't be that. I can be something different. I've got to look after myself so that I can go again, whatever that is. That was extraordinary. Thank you so much.